start off introducing myself. I'm Susan Welch-Sigurd-Maldo, so I'm with Strategy Analytics. I'm an industry analyst, which means I look at all these trends and things happening, and I look globally. I work with a lot of operators as well as solutions companies and some of the over-the-tops and others who bring things to the ecosystem, and really try to piece together conversations about how you work together to improve businesses across the board and make new opportunities, learn innovation and things that are happening in different parts of the world, understand the network technologies and all the transitions happening there, and the solutions like things that Tonic do that you need to pull in to really enable new business models. So it's really exciting here to be able to talk about, we went from voice to text to data. And then how do you continue to differentiate? How do you grow ARPU? How do you look at loyalty and manage your churn? Because in saturated markets, it's not just getting a customer, it's keeping that customer, helping them grow their ARPU, but also staying very relevant to them because there's so many things riding over whatever type of device you have. And then I think as we talk about mobile ecosystem expanding, there's all these other players out there, whether it be B2B2C, commerce, retail, new types of connected devices, the whole automotive ecosystem is becoming part of this, wearables. It's a broadening ecosystem of players. So I think that's where we need to think about what's the role, where can the operators sit, can they move up the value chain, how do they not be disintermediated? So we're going to run through some of these questions. So of course, please feel free, we will do some audience Q&A. So if you have a question, you're welcome to raise your hand. We can come to you as we go. But I'm going to start off asking everyone to just explain to the audience, where do you fit in the ecosystem? Where's your place? What's your perspective on this? We'll start with that. So Danielle, we'll have you go first. Yeah.
So hello, Danielle Levitas. So for those of you that may be less familiar with App Annie, so App Annie provides the data and market insights at an app level, at a market level, to help companies understand how to maximize the impact of their app. So whether it's tools to better understand what partnerships, what features to build in, acquisition of users, how do you maximize the development of your app to drive engagement and retention, ultimately ROI and monetization. So I think for a lot of folks, they may think, oh, apps, it's publishers, it's people over there, so to speak. But the reality is the market started with game publishers and the platform players. But then, our customer base really reflects it. We're working with big brands, CPG companies, retailers, banks, travel and hospitality. Apps have really fundamentally, well, we've taken advantage of obviously that network, right? If it wasn't for the network, they wouldn't be here. But really being this critical channel to reach your customers whenever and wherever they want to engage with you. So more to come.
Yeah. So I'm Gary Greenbaum, as I mentioned before. Tonic provides a platform service that we sell to carriers. As I mentioned, this is to enable new revenue streams around monetizing the mobile internet. A couple things to add to that is we are a full stack provider. It's not just a bunch of component technologies that we license to carriers. It's really the full stack, whether it's the content services, the offerings, the tools, the management. It's really whatever is needed from a carrier to move this forward and to enable these new revenue streams.
Great, and Fred?
Hi, everyone. So our position starts with a key realization that the appetite for mobile connectivity, emerging markets, even developed markets, greatly exceeds the size of our subscribers' wallets, right? So we start with a market where there's a huge value, very hard to estimate, but in the multi-billion dollars of mobile data connectivity pent-up demand. So what we've done is we've created a marketplace where operator can put out their mobile connectivity and through us access additional sales channels, additional models that supplement their retail channels or enterprise channels today, right? So the magic in there is, of course, there's a marketplace, so all the relationships and the understandings that there's so much to win from joining this marketplace, but there's also the technology, right? Because the value of a meg of data can be shaped. You can apply policy to it. Is it a meg that can be used for one application? Is it a roaming meg? Is it a meg for night, for morning? I mean, anything is possible. And in fact, I discover every day, including today, new models for that marketplace and new customers that can join.
Great. All right, Nick.
Great. My name is Nicholas Wadke. I work for a company called VEON. VEON was previously Vimpelcom, and we're a mobile telco. We have 230 million customers around the world, which would make us the 6th largest telco in the world. So we're sort of the biggest company that many of you have not heard of, and we're operating in faraway places like Pakistan, Bangladesh, but also Algeria, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Ukraine, Italy, Russia. So we have a very broad geography upon which we spread. And my job is I'm based in London, and I am responsible for the digital content services, and that is all the digital content that we either partner with or our partners that actually provide that content to our customers around the world.
Great. I think I'd like to talk a little bit here. We've said, voice, text, data, going beyond that. You can talk about a range of things. We talked a little bit about this. Where's the traction so far? What kind of offerings are you seeing getting most traction? And it can be, in emerging markets, it could be prepaid dominant, postpaid dominant. There's a lot of different models. But maybe we'll start with you, Nicholas, coming from where you have offerings. What kind of things have you done that you're seeing get traction and uptake from subscribers?
Well, a couple of things. I mean, it's probably no surprise here, but music is a hygiene factor. You've just got to have music, right? Everyone wants 1,000 songs in their pocket. And sort of the sort of consumer has sort of made that association already. There's a lot of content that the consumer will not really necessarily associate with their telco. Ooh, really? I don't really want that. But music is a great start. And because we are providing the bandwidth and the streaming, it makes a whole bunch of sense. The experience on the mobile phone is beautiful. The sound quality is very good. So for a whole bunch of reasons, I think music aligns perfectly with what what we in the telco provide. So that's sort of a core piece. The second thing that's also very that's becoming where we're seeing a lot of the growth is around video. And so we have an editorial team, for example, and a content team that does a lot of short form video content. We talk about this being snackable, shareable content, and that's the kind of stuff that is absolutely skyrocketing in terms of our customers being able to bust up content. I can watch little short videos. I can I can get my news on short form video clips. So those are the two things where we're seeing most traction.
Yeah, great. And Danielle, what about you? Looking at it more from pulling in the app economy, are there different things that you think are getting most traction, or really making some difference here in the market for thinking about where the operators sit?
So if you look at the overall engagement with apps, to give you guys some context, so on average, consumers spend about almost 3 hours a day in apps. Just let that sit for a minute. And when you think about that, and you think about how diverse is that engagement, right? So 3 hours, and the amazing thing with mobile, right, is it's not just now a primary screen for a lot of folks, but it also competes with non-consumption. So you're able to spend time in those tweener moments when you're waiting for this session to start, or when you're in line, for the loo over there, or whatever it happens to be. And the reality is, social and communications are, no surprise, a dominant category. But you're talking about in the range of, on average, 40% of our time. So that still leaves an enormous amount of time that's spent across a lot of other engagement areas. And so, not surprisingly, entertainment is a key factor. Games have been around for a long time, but not surprisingly, video's really been the bright spot. Also, the amazing thing with video is it both complements, in many cases, a service provider strategy, whether it's to have sort of access on the go, or to be a value add through a mobile provider. But the other piece is, obviously, there's OTT services, and we're seeing direct monetization through the App Store. So it's not just activating a subscription that maybe you purchased elsewhere, but it's actually being activated through the App Store. And we've seen revenue growth, essentially double over the last 2 years in that space. And then, of course, and we can get into some other things, when you start thinking about commerce, like you start talking trillions of dollars in the mobile market, that has to do with GMV, services. Think of every ride share you've ever ordered, food you've had delivered, transactional revenue, obviously fintech and what's happening with finance and banking apps. So there's a lot of transactional opportunity. And so what's the role as we move to a more frictionless set of experiences with our customers?
Right, great. And maybe, Gary, it'd be interesting to hear from you what you're seeing in terms of, where is the opportunity, with some of the sponsored things, are opening up for other players to come in and participate with the operators in enabling things out to their customers a bit, as Danielle talked about the apps being a key part of what we do.
I think the first question was, how do we see this playing out kind of globally? I just wanted to comment on that a little bit. And I think, it's different by geography. I don't want to necessarily comment on whether it's voice or video or audio, but really about business model. What we're definitely seeing is an explosion around kind of sponsored type access in emerging markets, particularly where data tends to be more expensive on average. And what's interesting about that is it's the operators themselves. This is a natural transition for them to get into the ad space and try to recoup some of that lost opportunity that currently Google and Facebook have today. And you are starting now to see many carriers, Telephonic, for example, and Singtel, purchase, acquire, and gain that expertise around advertising. And what they're finding, the statistics are rather clear. Sponsored access really is a very valuable value proposition for both the brand and the consumer. Namely, consumers are providing access and exchange for engagement. Right? That's not something that Google or Facebook can do. So certainly, sponsored data rewards. We're seeing, I think, a groundswell of activity there. More of the emerging economies and more of the developed economies. I think there's maybe experimentation around these pass models, unlimited access content models. I mentioned Vodafone is doing things like that, as well as the zero rating that you're seeing, certainly in the United States and parts of Europe.
Yeah, and just to follow up on that, you're seeing things what about the snackable aspect? Are you doing like hour passes, day passes, month passes? How do you see that playing out?
Yeah, what's really interesting about this pass space, we've been participating in that. People value the flexibility and personalization that it provides. There is no one-size-fits-all type model, and so there's a lot of uptake because it fits people's specific needs. And studies have shown that people will purchase more when A, they know what they're buying, and 2, it fits their particular needs.
Sure, great. And Fred, what about you? What are you seeing getting the most traction today in terms of new models and opportunity?
Sure. I'll focus on one that I find very interesting, and I'll piggyback on Gary's presentation earlier on. I think there's a key number that we don't forget, but we overlook, and that's this 1 trillion or 1.3 trillion to 6.3 trillion in 4 years, I think, right? So that's the app economy, and like you described it, it's the e-commerce, mobile commerce. But you know what? It includes mobile advertising as well, right? And one thing that we're focusing on, amongst others, is to tap into this $200 billion plus marketing budget, annual budget, right? And which is spent on TV ads, you name it, coupons. And in our market, the market that we're building, where data can be transacted between mobile operators and third parties, we position mobile data as a reward currency, but a smart reward, right? It's not just I'm getting data and it helps me. It's I'm getting data when it matters through content providers or through brands that I engage with. So the relationship is much, much stronger, right? So in this app ecosystem, basically one thing that we address is that we enable our customers with mobile data as a currency, and what they find is that it's a much, much more powerful currency for almost any mobile marketing tactic that you can think of. 2 reasons. One, it's a reward that you can really target. You can really target the user with something that matters because they're already engaged from a mobile perspective. I'm sorry. And secondly is the cost, right? Instead of giving $1 outright to someone, you actually give something that looks like $1, but probably costs 20 cents. Right. So your marketing ROI, if you put all this together, is just increasingly multiplied.
Well, and I think then you add in, they get also some of the analytics from the campaigns and the interaction and engagement, right? So there's also added benefits, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's about a mobile strategy. I mean, so going if you go mobile first, it's probably one of the things that we want to look at in one way or another. I mean, Gary mentioned reducing friction to usage, right? With sponsored data. Sure, that's a way, and it's extremely important. Using data as a currency to shape behavior is another one.
Well, I guess one question I sometimes hear from operators who are a little bit skeptical about sponsored data. Well, first of all, maybe everybody's got Wi-Fi or pretty big gigabit plans in some areas. In other areas, you certainly don't have a lot. But are you customizing people to getting free data so that they don't want to pay for as much data? Or how do you think, I mean, are you cannibalizing other opportunities? Or are you building more because you're pulling in other ecosystem players and expanding the pie? I think that's, talking about that as a challenge is sometimes interesting. I don't know.
It's more than a challenge. It's the first question we get.
It's the first question
from
you get,
mobile
exactly.
operators. No, it's absolutely. The goal is to grow the pie.
Build the pie, right.
Okay, of course. Yeah. The net effect of bringing in a third party, which is whatever the model, willing to pay for a subscriber's data, so basically replacing the retail channel, the net effect of that, what we've seen is an increase in data usage. Because I mentioned earlier, right, we can consume more data than we have available. Even us, we're really spoiled, right? But we, at one point or another, sort of disengage because we might be worried about our data consumption. So the point is, those models target that, right, that need, but also target those that are unlikely to top up or unlikely to expand their plan or unlikely or unable, really, for financial reasons. So no, it doesn't. That's not the intent, of course, and it's not the net effect that we see. Meaning, no kind of.
Yeah.
A couple of things to add to that. Sponsored data also can be used to connect the unconnected.
Yes.
Right. So absolutely no cannibalization. That is just new revenue opportunities. But moreover, what we're seeing, sponsored data working best in those regions where people are on prepaid plans, where data tends to be expensive, where, as Fred mentioned, there is friction. People have to make a conscious decision whether to engage or not because they know when their prepaid plan is up, it's over. So in that case, it's a little bit easier to sell the opportunity of incremental as opposed to cannibalistic opportunity around sponsored data.
Great.
I think also when you think about some of the sachet economies that we deal with, we have people sometimes topping up. I think some of our customers are topping up 3 or 4 times a week. And in that case, they're basically going from Monday to Wednesday, and they've got just enough. They've been paid, so they can now top up again. And I think these types of incentives could, in terms of what we've seen, have been very beneficial because it unlocks for them the opportunity to play a game or to watch a video. So in other markets, where, for example, like Russia, a lot of our customers never even reach their data limit, and so they're much more prolific. And that's, in that instance, it's more about maybe how you market that and how you present them.
Great.
And I'll just to add on to this broader discussion around marketing dollars and this subsidy expanding the pie. I largely view it as expanding the pie. Like even if you look at the app spend space, so consumers last year we estimate spent about $86 billion through all app stores globally on mobile apps. The advertising spend through apps is even greater than that. It surpassed in-store spend essentially by the end of 2016. And when you think about what that means, obviously in many cases it means publishers can actually earn revenue and sort of keep them going. But this comes back to an overall effect, right? It brings more value ultimately to the combination of the handset, the service providing that handset, if you can get more engagement through apps. So there is a pull-through effect. And to give you another example, so not surprisingly, you have a market like China where the app economy is the largest. If you then think about a market like India, so over the last essentially 5 quarters, it's now become the largest market for downloads through Google Play. Now, from a revenue standpoint, it only generated about $100 million. So through the App Store. And so what's driving a lot of that monetization and helping to really deliver value to customers has been in-app advertising. And the sort of analogy there in terms of rewarded videos is what we talk about, right? So it's a little bit different from sponsored videos, but this notion of you give to get, right? You give somebody value to watch something and they get, in the case of games, let's say tokens, or maybe it's free minutes towards, additional content. So I think all of this really helps the overall ecosystem from evolving consumer expectations and really helping to, frankly, expand the use case and therefore the value of these mobile services.
Great. Well, let's think about a little bit, how do you define a success? I mean, first of all, as you're thinking of a new plan or a new type of service, how do you evaluate it and decide when to go to market with it? And what types of KPIs do you have to think about in terms of, is it a certain revenue increment that you're looking for, loyalty? How are you thinking about measuring it? Maybe we'll start with VEON, because from the operator perspective, you have to do that.
So from us, we start with engagement. So people often think about monetization. Our philosophy is really there will be no monetization unless there's engagement. And I think people make the mistake often of trying to leapfrog into the business model, and I think what we often forget is that there's been a massive tidal wave and massive shift in terms of value. And it's quite interesting now because, I came from the media space, I've been in the space 20 years, but, there used to be the value exchange between the customer and the publisher, or the customer and the broadcaster and the customer, it was a very tight relationship, where, the customer paid by watching lots of commercials, or the customer paid by paying their cable bill. And all of a sudden, that value exchange has been massively disintermediated. And the customers now, today's customers get all this content for free. And so, so you have to sort of start thinking about, well, where does that value dissipate to? And I think that's what we're struggling with. I think as an industry, we struggle a lot with the fact that, how can we monetize for a new consumer? Because when you talk to millennials or teens today, they're cord cutting. They're not familiar with watching, with paying a cable bill. They get all their content on their laptop. They're quite happy. By the way, games are free. Oh, music, I can get that for free. There's a free offering. So I look at my teenagers and my teenage daughters, and their entire consumption pattern is free. I don't think they pay a single bill, and yet they're very, very rich content consumers. So the challenge that we have in terms of where do we find that value is, the first part is if you expect to get a transaction with a millennial, if you expect to get a transaction with a teenager, you do not start by offering a commercial proposition. It is a long dance. You have to earn their trust. You have to win them over. They have to fall in love with the brand. They have to understand what the purpose is. And then at that point, after that engagement's won over, then you can think about, how do I present a commercial transaction? So it's a long answer to your question, but bottom line is, you've always got to start with engagement, and you need to be a lot more patient rather than leapfrogging right to the consumer proposition.
Okay.
I have two metrics, I guess. And I'll talk about the operator and then I guess the sponsor, if you will, or the marketer. I'll stick to marketing for this one. So, and true story, of course. A measure of success, okay, is when enterprise customers for an operator start inquiring about how they could use this fantastic the opportunity to manipulate data allowances with policy for their own use. So basically something that you would deploy, for you and I, for instance, and then you have the mobile operators, enterprise customers, and come and inquire. And that's more business and more engagement for the operator. So that's one angle, right? I think this one's interesting. Yeah. The second one is, it's actually more about the real metrics or that you can actually measure. And I had a conversation today precisely about this, and it's about measuring, all right, I have three choices, okay? We talked about engagement, let's talk about the adoption. Preloads, I'll reward you for a download, and the other one, I'll send you a text message and click the link, right? And we do all three. And we can measure, all right, if you spend $1, what's your return on that dollar? Our measure of success is when you use data as a currency for rewards, for instance, we can substantiate the fact that your dollar went a longer way, if you will, than any other tactic.
Okay, great. So in a sense, you're saying as a consumer type service is out there and a business comes and says, hey, I like this, I want to be able to use this for my own employees. Is that sort of the first example that you're seeing as a metric? Just to make sure we understood. So the channel of communication is not completely clear to me because I'm not actually on the ground with the operator. So I see the outcome. But I did see the operator really liking the solution for its subscribers and actually went on a pitch its enterprise. That makes sense. So that happened, but I think it also happened the other way. Right, good. Okay, great. Yeah.
I want to take another approach to this. We've talked a lot about engagement, but the other component is retention. And I think it's going to be very interesting in a world where there is eSIMs built into phones, where the switching cost from one carrier to another goes to zero, and whether this plays out as to carriers providing unique and differentiated services to hopefully retain and make that customer more sticky to their networks using content services. So this is something maybe for next year's talk, but I think retention is also a metric that will be evaluated for some.
Right. And do you have some examples of operators that are looking at tying some of this into sort of loyalty type plans or retention plans? Because I think that's also where it becomes interesting. Or is it more there's stickiness because they like what they're getting from you, so they stick with you? I mean, are there different types of models that you're seeing getting more traction in terms of how do you actually create that
Yeah, I don't think there's one answer right now.
Right.
I think there's a lot of experimentation going on in different geographies with different carriers. It is not anywhere mature enough, I think, and I think the answer will be varied, honestly, depending upon the economics and the competitive nature of the environment that the carrier is in.
Great. So, and what about from your perspective? Are you seeing any particular KPIs that you bring through the different partners that you're doing sort of an interaction with? How do you talk to people about what's success in this area?
So I'll start sort of app broadly and then also tie it back specifically on the telco front. So for apps broadly, not surprisingly, it really depends on the maturity of that app. And that maturity might vary because an app might have launched in one region and it rolls out. Think of Netflix over the last couple of years and their international expansion and just how much that's driven essentially their bottom line. So if you think about subscriber growth, it starts with installs, right? And then the retention metric, right? What's your D3, your day 7, your day 15, your day 30 type retention metrics. Depending on the type of app, I think a lot of folks get focused on time spent. Obviously, if it's social and communications, you think about social apps, it's so much about advertising. Of course, time matters. If you think about a banking app or a fintech app, sessions are an actual better metric to benchmark against because it's an indication of people getting value and coming back. If they're spending a lot more time, it's probably not that they're getting a lot more functionality out of your app. It's probably that there's too much friction in getting that job done. If you think about coming back on the operator side, and I concur on the revenue front. It's ROI, of course, matters, but it's very different in the space depending upon, is it initially about the network effect, driving users, and the monetization comes later, versus what's the role of ad versus direct app monetization versus let alone getting into commerce and transactions. And I think if you talk to any retailer, they will say basket spend in the app is significantly higher than what they see in web. So that's something else to keep in mind. There is this incredible, because it promotes loyalty, right? It promotes great, optimized, customized experiences. But on the telco front, what we start to see is how does it look different depending on the types of apps that are being used from market to market when you look at sort of cellular consumption versus Wi-Fi. And not surprisingly, across the board, if you sort of average it out, right, you're going to see, for example, video being, in that range of 80+%, in some countries 90+% being consumed while on Wi-Fi. Right. Whether that's in the home or out of the home, it's a combination, obviously. But what gets interesting, if you look at, for example, some of the service providers that have mobile apps for taking content on the go, you actually see a higher rate typically of cellular consumption versus, let's say, Netflix overall being much higher on Wi-Fi. And it similarly across the globe, it really depends on what that infrastructure looks like and what those plans are like. So it's, but that mix there varies by region, and it varies certainly by type of content. If the service provider has some exclusive or promotional aspect to that.
Yeah, and I think when you think about where the operator plays and you look at what's happening on some of the web scale, so if you talk about the Fang Effect, the Facebook, Apple, Netflix, Google, if you haven't heard the term Fang, I've heard people talking about it here as well, is the operators are not just competing for people's attention and how they expect to interact with you with themselves. They're now looking at expectations being set by how do I do something with my taxi ride share, or how do I do, find my hotel room. It's very much more of a digital engagement model and pulling in that way. How do you see that impacting? And I think we talked about, Nicholas, it'd be great to hear your perspective. You're pulling in other brands, you're pulling in other content. Do you risk giving up that brand awareness to the other players? Or how do you create your opportunity for operators to stay central as part of, as you get people doing more things on their devices? Yeah.
So, I mean, a couple of things there. The first of all is you know, let's take the. I always come back to the consumer. The consumer basically, and I'm sure you can verify this. I'm not sure if this is my data. It's maybe a year old, but the number of apps that people use a day, the number I've heard is about 7, and the number of people, and I guess maybe it varies by country, and the number of apps that people have installed on their phone, something like 40. Again, depends on country. I'm sure we'll get a better answer. But but I think what's so interesting about that is that, you know, if someone's only using less than 10 apps a day, you know, the question that comes up is, well, you know, and one of those is one of the all the fangs, as you mentioned. You know, where does the role of an operator start, and why would I click on that icon? Why would I click on the VEON icon? Why would I click on the Vodafone icon? Why would I click on the AT&T icon? Really, on the phone, there has to be a utility, a business purpose that ultimately drives that. And that's a very, very tough question. And the answer to that question is probably because that customer wants to either top up, or they want to have an engagement, or they have a customer service question. So you have to be thinking about that as the start of that conversation. So the customer journey is probably going to start from that utility, that core need to say, I want to be able to do something. And so at VEON, what we've done is we have, you know, we've created an application, a chat application, which is free. And so the customer can go there, they can find out exactly what their balance is, and, you know, and discover, you know, what their top-up amount is, or they can do that. But from there, we can then gently lead them to a broader experience. And what we are attempting to do, and what we're in the process of doing, is building we offer free chat. So you can chat for free, you can call for free, which is pretty damn novel when you can think of a telco kind of disintermediating their core business by saying, yeah, we'll charge, but you can also chat and talk for free. I think that takes a lot of guts. And I think our management's been very, very proactive about pushing that forward and saying, hey, by the way, download the VEON app, and you can actually communicate for free. And then the second layer on top of that is offering all these suite of services and content, and that's kind of where our team comes in, where we basically will hopefully display and offer opportunities for a music streaming service, for a video streaming service, for a game, to be able to play a mobile game, to be able to maybe read, get access to news. And that's sort of that second step, which is about being a curator, not necessarily creating the content, but curating the right content and presenting that to the customer in the right way.
Right.
I think another interesting take, though, I think it's quite provincial just in the United States, where you're starting to see the carriers actually become entertainment companies, and you're seeing a vertical integration between content and the networks themselves. And so it's very possible that in the US you might have Fang / Oath / AT&T, DirecTV moving forward.
All right. I'd love to hear a little bit your thoughts on, we've talked a little bit about what's getting traction, where we are. Gary talked earlier about where we've seen things changing since last year. What do you think's happening this coming year, in the next 2 years? I mean, obviously the whole industry is moving towards 5G. You can't walk around Mobile World Congress and not see 5G. But there's still a big role in that for LTE and other things. I mean, it's an evolving area. But what trends are you seeing in terms of types of service offerings, and then how you enable that, how the opportunity for operator grows? And what is it you have to have in place to really play in that? I mean, we've talked a little bit, there's obviously technology in behind this. You can't just say, oh, I'm going to go do this. What do you think these key trends are that we should be paying attention to as operators and others in the ecosystem? And what do you put in place to make sure you're ready to take part in that? And maybe we'll start from the App Annie perspective here for Danielle. Yeah.
So I think that good job on the numbers too, Nicholas. So it is about 40 apps on average. Interestingly enough, China actually averages a bit higher than that. And when you think about WeChat and it being sort of a platform app, it's pretty amazing that they actually use more apps on average. And it's about 10 to 11 a day on average. And emerging markets, surprisingly, can be at the very much at the high end, which might seem counterintuitive relative to sort of relative spend. But I think it's because of this mobile first and only digital platform that they're engaging with. But coming back to what I am excited about, what I expect to see some real innovation on as it relates to the combination of mobile and apps is really twofold. One is around payments. We know payments have been, mobile payments, peer-to-peer payments, these different services, banks starting to integrate them, not only sort of this disintermediated experience outside, but also the integration in some cases, integration with retailers, integration with other service providers. So I think, again, this gets back to reducing friction. When you reduce friction, you generally increase engagement, which I do think that means ultimately more spend because it's easier for the consumer. And that's another one of those things that I think emerging markets actually in many ways can lead once the infrastructure is there. Especially when it's sort of a less banked or underbanked or unbanked environment, as you start to think, how do you give these people a way to really transact? And they're not as wed in sort of other forms of I don't even know what, credit card, let's say, type of transactions. But I'd say that's the big one. The other on the technology side, per se, versus maybe enablement side, is really around AI and the role of sort of augmented experiences to really give sort of the next wave of capabilities, of experience, of immersion to consumers. So this is one of those things, you think about retail and the role of augmented reality to think about whether it's from clothing and virtually trying things on to furniture. And companies like IKEA and others are already experimenting in this space, but I think that this starts to become the norm. It sets the bar and expectations for what consumers are going to expect from other apps. And I think that also further aids in not just retail experiences, but you think, what could it do for travel? What could it do for really helping, as well as obviously in some cases entertainment? There will be a Harry Potter Niantic AR game.
And Gary, I'd love to hear from you because you create solutions, you create technology. What do you see that you're excited?
I was actually going to throw a question back to you, Susan.
Yes.
What timeline when you say the future? Right. I do think the longer timelines, we will see some really innovative 5G type sustainable businesses around AR, VR. You know, however, in the next say 5 years, I think there's going to be two new breeds of mobile carriers that I think are going to lead. One is the carrier as an entertainment company. We talked about it. We talked about that earlier. These are the big carriers who have the big spend that can do this vertical integration, and it is happening not just in the United States. But I also think it's easier now than ever before to become a mobile carrier, and I think there's going to be a new breed of a very agile, perhaps service, content service first type of mobile carrier. That will compete with these entertainment type companies, and I think we can see that over the next couple of years. So.
Maybe a bit like we've seen in the TV space, the skinny bundle and the user-generated content really disrupting. I mean, talk about digital natives and Generation Z. Do they even look at regular pay TV? No, probably not. It depends on the market. But I think you're right. There's a interesting opportunity to think about: are you going to be the disruptor? And if so, what do you do? And if you're someone who's been there, how do you enable disruptors in a way that keeps you really part of the game and create your own differentiated service to keep people engaged? So that's a good point, Gary. Yeah. And in terms of time frame, yes, I think it's interesting to think farther out, but I think you also have to think, what am I doing in 2018? I'm going back from Mobile World Congress. What do I need to say? Hey, we have to do this. We need to be thinking about this. Let's prep for this year, but let's, maybe the 3-year horizon kind of thing as well. Yeah. Fred, let's hear what you've got to think about trends and.
Yeah. So I can't disagree with anything that was said because it's actually out there. So the integration, using content and connectivity providers, there's no arguing. But it goes counter to something that I see, and I'm going back to the consumer a little bit like you did. And what I see is an increasing appetite for choice and control. Okay. Yeah. And so if my connectivity provider is also my content provider, what does it mean? I don't know what it means, but it's probably less choice and control. It depends on what my relationship is. But what it means for me, at least as a business, is I'm sort of planning ahead and looking at this and saying I need to be able to provide solutions based on technology and based on a business model that works for everyone, which gives users choice and control over how they pay for what they consume in the app economy. And there's no way, you cannot just bundle everything. Consumers looked at the unbundled cost of those services, especially in the emerging markets. So in fact, if you hire an Uber in Kenya, for instance, the data cost part of it is actually very material because of the mapping, the GPS, but not the GPS, but the mapping and all this. So the point is choice and control. So how do we meet that demand and help operators, be their subscribers' best friend? I don't know yet, but
No, I think it's a very, very relevant question. I think it's a little bit like I'd said. It's people's expectations are being formed by other digital interactions and other things they have, and they want that personalization and control. And there's, as you said, with AI, there's much better tools now to help deliver on that. And if you don't, they may walk away and go to someone who gives that to them, right? And how about you from the operator perspective?
So first, I just want to react to the two comments that you guys made. So I'll play devil's advocate a little bit here, but I really wonder whether mashing together content like a Time Warner and an operator is really going to be what the customer wants.
Right.
I agree with your unbundling choice and control. And is it really an elegant marriage? And I would really question that. I mean, I think, if you look at electricity as a utility, nobody bundles a light. Oh, I'm going to buy a light or a refrigerator with my electricity. It's a completely separate proposition. I buy my electricity from my utility company, and I buy my refrige from Samsung, or I buy my light somewhere else. And I think that's how the customer views it. And I'm not sure that. I think that especially as data becomes more cheaper and it becomes more effective, I'm not sure the customer is going to be swayed to purchase watch one movie or not watch a movie or access CNN or not access CNN based on the data utility of it. So I'm a skeptic, and I think that a lot of times some of these mergers are done at the highest kind of level, at the M&A level, where there's kind of strategic rationale. But I think what's often forgotten is the role of the customer, and guess who's in charge? The customer. So no matter what, however clever M&A deals are done, at the end of the day, the customer is going to decide exactly what they want, choice and control on their terms. So that's one point. And the other point about what's the biggest thing here, I mean, the magic word for me, I mean, hold on to your seats, but it's really, is data. I mean, I just see it everywhere I go, every single booth, everyone's talking about how they do data, what they do with data, how they collect data, how they parse data, how they're going to better serve their customer. And again, I think there's a massive gap between people's aspirations and the reality. And I think telcos were just as guilty as the next people, but everyone's got, when you ask people, oh, what's your data strategy? Oh, well, we've got, we're mining data, we're collecting data, we've got X number of terabytes of data, and then you ask them, okay, so tell me, how is that going to help my life? How is that going to help my customer's life? What are you actually going to do with the data? And that's when then you kind of get the pregnant pause, and it's like, well, we haven't figured that out yet. So I think the business of collecting data is a kind of long road to nowhere. It's much more about, and that's why I think a lot of the real solutions are going to be arrived at industry. It's ultimately an industry problem, whether it's oil and gas, whether it's fashion, whatever that, it's the industry issue that's going to ultimately be responsible for figuring out what the problem is and then using their data to solve that. I'm not necessarily a believer that there's going to be some data factory who's going to whitewash our problems away.
Well, and it's kind of fun with this industry. You get data monetization. There's two data monetizations. So how do you monetize the amounts of megabits of data and gigabits that people use over your network, and then the actual data you collect about people and how they do things, and how do you monetize those sets of data in ways that help with privacy and trust and that opt-in, opt-out type of thing. So I think, talk about data monetization, it could be two totally different things, but they're both extremely relevant and big questions, and people need to look at that. Do we have any audience questions?
I would just say, on that note, GDPR then,
yes.
from this standpoint.
Does anyone have any questions you'd like to ask from the audience? We've got a quiet audience today. That's all right. You've probably been doing lots and lots of talking at this show, lots of listening and conversation. One thing I'm just going to ask, I think you did this last year, what are we going to see next year? Make a little prediction, just a quick little finish up here of, how far are we going to get with what goes next? That stumped them. I knew I'd get some question that stumped them. Yes, no, I think it's you've had some great comments, but anyone want to make a wrap-up comment and just kind of final word today?
Okay, you guys have a good answer. It wouldn't surprise me if we saw some amazing advancements in robotics. I know they're starting to see some on the floor. Yeah. I've seen some really good demos. I'm kind of wowed by some of the stuff, but it wouldn't surprise me if next year we have a robot or something who can really interact with us in a pretty meaningful way. I would say that would be pretty cool.
Interesting. No, but you're probably right. You could be right. Haptics.
Haptics, okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
There's a convergence of technology happening right now, and I see it finally being not a great concept, but finally something that can be used.
Right. Okay, good.
You know, I guess I'm kind of jaded. I've been coming here for about 15 years and CES for about 20 years, and I've yet to see revolution on a year-by-year basis. I've seen steady innovation and evolution. So I'm not going to go out on a limb to say that next year we're going to see something big, but I'm sure we will see evolution taking place along basically all the major industries, handset vendors, business models, usage models, AR, VR, robotics.
Right. All right.
I'll add, I think on the haptics front, I'm a huge believer in the role of sensors, of what that can do. The flip side is, I guess, haptics are sort of one aspect of it, and then there's just all the sensors combined and what's done with that data, but just sort of giving, again, gets back to more immersive experiences. My take would be, from a sort of overall personal, is to see the growth of how many transactions people end up making through mobile a year from now versus today. Whether it's peer-to-peer payments, whether it's purchases, purchasing more sort of more broadly, so not just an Amazon type purchase, but when you start thinking about other types of transactions. And then from an sort of overall standpoint, I'd say I'd expect the market overall to see growth in terms of the overall app spend in that range of 30 to 35% over the next 12 months. So I'll just put that out there. So call it, over 110 billion in just App Store spend alone by the end of 2018.
Sounds great. Well, I'll make one final comment. My job is to do predictions and things like that. I'm an analyst, right? I look at trends, I see what's happening. But I do think, talking about mobile ecosystem, one thing that we do really see happening is the expansion, the opening up. And you see so many other companies, whether it's Industry 4.0, whether it's brands thinking about mobile engagement, whether it's people doing entertainment. I think, and it's not just smartphones, the types of devices I think are diversifying a little bit more as well. But other industries interacting with the mobile industry and how that plays out in terms of innovation, business models, opportunities, it'll be incremental. But I think that experimentation, I think Gary talked about that, even operators trying, and the ability to experiment with something, come back to the whole DevOps mindset, the whole design thinking type of thing that we've seen, but that coming in, trying things out, learning from it, listening to the customers, and then coming back and doing something new and pulling others in. So it's great to hear how everyone's got your perspectives, and I'd like to thank the panel. If anyone has questions, we're going to be around, stick around, we have a little bit of time in the room to do some interaction. So, if you don't want to ask your question in front of everyone, you can still interact with the great panel here. And thank you, everyone. Look forward to seeing what we see next year. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.